Good afternoon, friends, and those in pursuit of peace across the world. I'm Jennifer Copeland with the North Carolina Council of Churches, and I greet you this afternoon on behalf of the 19 denominations that make up the North Carolina Council of Churches. Today, we are especially grateful for the North Carolina Synod of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America and Bishop Emily Hartner. It was Bishop Hartner who first reached out to me earlier this year to suggest I reach out to Pastor Carl Rosenberg, and then Carl connected us to Professor Dwayne Larson. Dr. Larson comes to us from a lifetime of leading and teaching in Lutheran schools. I'm sure the Lutherans are especially grateful for his service as president and professor at Wartburg Theological Seminary and as a member of the faculty at their renowned United Lutheran Seminary. I'm grateful for that as well, of course, but I'm more grateful that a great deal of Professor Larson's theological scholarship has focused on war and peace from many facets, and it includes the tenets of just war theory. Dr. Larson, thank you for your work, especially, and today for your presence here with us. A few words about how we will operate today. Dr. Larson will offer us a slice of his vast wisdom over the next 30 minutes or so. And while he shares this with us, feel free to post your questions and comments in the chat window. I will monitor that along with some help from our staff at the council and then facilitate a question and answer session with Dr. Larson when the time comes to move into that direction. And then we'll try to conclude our session at the top of the hour, respecting 1 p.m. as the advertised stop sign. But Carl and Dwayne and I will stay online for just a few minutes after we conclude in case there are additional questions or concerns that some of you might want to raise with us today. And with that, I would like to turn it over to Carl, who will start us off with an appropriate invocation for what we are about to discuss. Thank you, Carl, and thank you, Dwayne.
Thank you, Reverend Dr. Jennifer Copeland. I am grateful for this opportunity and also thankful for Reverend Dr. Dwayne Larson and your speaking into this. It's my honor to be able to speak the invocation for this event. I will read a saying attributed to a warrior who preceded Jesus by 600 years and another attributed to Jesus from the Gospel of Matthew. Before I invoke our Trinitarian God, I'll pause for 30 seconds for silent breathing and prayer for peace. And then I will pray an edited version of a prayer attributed to Francis of Assisi. The ancient Chinese warrior Lao Tse is credited as having said, "If there's to be peace in the world, there must be peace in the nations. If there is to be peace in the nations, there must be peace in the cities. If there is to be peace in the cities, there must be peace between neighbors. And if there's to be peace between neighbors, there must be peace in the home. And if there's to be peace in the home, there must be peace in the heart." Jesus said, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God." Let us humbly surrender ourselves to the eternal divine creator of the universe, who spoke all that is into existence. Let us invite Jesus into our heart, bringing peace that the world cannot give. Come, Holy Spirit, abide among us, be our companion, advocate, and comforter. Lord, make us an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let us sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. Where there is sadness, joy. O divine Master, grant that we may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive, it is in pardoning that we are pardoned, it is by dying that we are born to eternal life. Amen. Thank you, Dwayne. Uh, I already told you before we started recording that I'm very grateful for the book that you and Jeff Zuss wrote, Care for the Sorrowing Soul. It's uh, articulate look at moral injury and caring for those who are affected by it. So thank you for that work and for presenting today.
And my humble thanks for your having invited me to engage in this important conversation, Carl and Jennifer. I am indeed humbled to be here. It's been a little while since I've been in this kind of a saddle. I appreciate being back, and especially with the good people of North Carolina, who were among my first audiences way back when I began the theological education vocation. So it's good that you are here. I'm grateful too for the work of the North Carolina Ecumenical Council. That's Council of Churches. That's so important these days, and it's good to see that there's a robust function in that manner that's been so well led by Jennifer. Congratulations to her for her and deep gratitude for her leadership in that. So we're here today on the interesting title of Jesus and Just War. That's not often put together in quite that way, so it's compelling. It reminds me of a book I came across for undergraduate teaching some years ago about Jesus and war, and the book was Who Would Jesus Kill? And in that secular environment, it was almost gobsmacking, but still somewhat expected to for students not raised in any kind of religious sensibility to have answered that question as if it was a serious one, inviting a direct response. So some of the fish bit, shall we say, in trying to figure out, well, who would he kill, without really quite knowing who Jesus was. And we are here because we have a particular sense of knowing that's more than simply epistemic, simply more than a head trip, right? And that makes a difference that is often missed when it comes to discussing anything theological, much more just war theory, because I expect we've all had the experience of talking theology, talking spirituality, talking about Jesus as if Jesus were not in the room. And that's a language limit, of course, for us, but all the more, it's one that we're not often mindful of when we consider that just war has a deeper uh, warrant, a deeper core, shall we say, than being simply theoretical, as if Jesus is not in the room. So mindfulness as to where Jesus is in the way that Carl invoked for us with such fine, apt prayer is an important ingredient, at least to keep in our minds, as we can't speak in any other way of Jesus than other than the third person. But with Dietrich Bonhoeffer, whom I'll reference near the end of my remarks, with any number of other modern and contemporary theologians, we are mindful, aren't we, that as we speak of Jesus in the third person, there's in some respect, insofar as we are faithful, that Jesus is speaking to us each at the same time. And so the dialogue is not just between me and you, but is one that is literally enspirited because of the deep ocean of love and divinity in which we are already, by our baptism, swimming, huh? Having said that, as kind of one piece of prologue, another piece simply apologetic is that I've been on the run a lot. I'm moving. I'm trying to outdo Marie Kondo by looking for a condo after a life of a large home. And so I've been busy downsizing and selling my place and on the move. And so I can only work from notes on this. I didn't have the time to put together anything for screen sharing, any PowerPoints, so to speak. So please indulge me along the way as only the talking head, and I hope we can get well beyond that, and that'll be clear enough with what I have to say. Uh, so the interesting thing about just war theory as a start, at least methodologically, when we talk about the discussion protocols, is that we often call it theory. It's also called doctrine. To be sure, there's a difference between theory and doctrine. But in other case, I suspect that our experience, if not better knowledge of just war doctrine or theory, is that we've regarded it, at least as a culture, as kind of a checkoff list. It's the kind of thing that we know from somewhere that we ought to be consulting. Yeah, principles too. Thank you for that. That we should consult as we look at the awful prospect of war making. But sometimes that's been on the popular level at such a level as our grocery list might be on our smartphones. I keep a list on my smartphone to remind me what I need to get when I go the next time, but that means week by week I'm changing the list. But it's inevitable that when I go do that shopping, end up paying more attention to what catches my eye than what's on my list. And the list becomes kind of a pro forma thing that maybe I've checked off, but it was not as authoritative, was not as norming for me in my shopping as it ought to have been. Other things maybe not only caught my eye, but my checkbook or a bank card. So we may have this impression that just war principles are just a checkoff list, that the military on its side and politicians on their side have an obligation to observe, and it might, with the lack perhaps of communication about processes of deliberation around just war principles, we then have the impression that they are just sort of a fait accompli, some pro forma kind of activity. I want to say straight out that I know and am deeply confirmed in my conviction that on the military side, at least in the chain of command, it is not a pro forma activity. The principles are seriously considered, both in the chain of command and in all of the educational institutions of the military complex, especially so for officer training in our war colleges, for those who are candidates for ranking officer, and for those who already are ranking officers who may be rising in the ranks. It's always a matter of looking again at just war principles and especially looking at their application through case histories, both experienced, historically so, as well as imagined in any wargaming. So that's a piece that I think ought to give us, at least for me, some sense of gratification that they're consulted. Today, though, I suspect that what brings us together around this and why we feel it's urgent again to consider just war principles is that it has not seemed to be quite so deliberate in consideration this time around, at least from the political establishment. It is, I want to say with deep gratitude, the United States Council of Bishops, Conference of Bishops, Catholic bishops, that has brought this to the fore. We've heard it from the Pope. We've heard it from some theological leaders in non-Catholic denominations. We've seen some philosophical reference to it in leaders, particularly the philosophical ethics community. But we have not seen a whole lot, have we? Again, of just what is just war, what are the principles themselves. We've not seen proof of deliberation of that from our representative leaders, and in some respects too from the military, which has been publicly fairly quiet about it, but I'm still convinced that they have looked at them. So here we are. Me being a boomer, I know that just war theory came to be a live question for me during the Vietnam period. I have confidence that just war principles were deeply consulted and evident, manifestly so, during the conduct of World War II, even if we have particular questions well after the fact of when they were actually followed. But today, boomers and millennials and alphas and whatever the next generation to come is, we're all a little bit concerned, or maybe even haven't heard of just war principles. And what we've seen instead is kind of a verbiage of bellicosity that has taken the public realm. We've seen, I'm being simply descriptive here, a change from the the naming of the Department of Defense, which happened in 1949, mindful of wanting to be communicative of just war principles, as well as aligning all of the branches together then. But now that Department of Defense has been renamed, not officially, as Department of War, and we speak more of warriors and war makers, even while within the military. Well, we can talk about warriors where that's not the preferred term in most public communication, because it can connote what the military establishment itself does not really want to connote, as if violence is at the core of what we do. I want to suggest that's not. I want to suggest that mindfulness of just war principles, doctrine, theory, means that, and this will be my first major point, we approach just war thinking as more than a matter of theory, more than a matter even of praxis. It is a matter of heart. So I want to suggest that one, that just war thinking begins with the heart, as so interestingly and wonderfully was prayed for us at the outset by Carl. I had Lao Tse in my mind as well earlier on. And then, secondly, I will get on to the components of just war principles, of the theory, which is more than theory, as they are always governed initially by the heart. That's something that is often, I submit, missed, and perhaps understandably so, in any popular conversation around just war. And then finally, a third part, I want to reference the church's use of just war principles during World War II, vis-a-vis Dietrich Bonhoeffer and others, but that'll have to be very brief. So to my first major point, and I'm going to word it again differently, I want to say that there is a proper Christian disposition for just war. I want to begin with a startling, perhaps, but I think true statement that one cannot wage a just war without one's core preference for peace, which is another way to say just war is not just if the war maker is not first a pacifist. Just war is not just if the war maker is not first a pacifist. I put it that way because we often think the war maker, in the terms of just war even, and the pacifist are contradictory terms. Maybe rhetorically in certain spaces we have to approach it that way to make the point. But I want to say that peace is a radical, that is, it goes to the root of, it's an essential of, for us, Christian being. Because peace is not simply the absence of war. Peace is the commitment to and the realization of joyful relationship with God, of a reconciled and happy co-life with all humankind and creation, and with oneself. So the ambition of peace is the well-being of everyone, always in a mindful and confident mutuality. So it's not just solipsist or personal, it's also public-oriented. It cannot enlarge oneself at any other's expense. Peace, indeed, is a personal and the social treatment, as we well know, of all people as God's image bearers. Now, we also know, again, thinking of how difficult it is to talk Christian theory as if Jesus is not in the room, we also know that while everyone is a bearer of God's image, that sounds to us, as to many, like an unachievable and unrealistic ideal, this kind of peacemaking, because we are also in thrall, aren't we, to sin. Those who know Christ know and are committed to actualizing peace above all else, and that is a happy life. That is why Jesus says, blessed are the peacemakers. Blessed meaning too that, boy, do we need the peacemakers. But peacemakers are blessed because they, or we, in being so, are living according to essential nature and calling. And yet, to be all that we can be, to riff on a military phrase from that PR some years ago, to be all we Christians can be is nevertheless challenged by the fact of personal and societal sin. We know what Jesus said about peace, because only he can give it finally as restoration of us to our true vocations as human beings who bear peace. That's as likely a curt or as curt of a summary as I can make of what we would call a theological anthropology, of what it means theologically to be a human being. We are made for peace. We are called to live harmoniously in that way. But what does it mean as social creatures? It means that we do have to somehow work continually for peace as an ambition. It's a project, right? It's not just a condition, it's a project, because we live in the conditions, societally as well as personally, of sin. So I take a cue from Cardinal Blaise Cupich, nearby here where I am speaking from in Chicago, who has tried to outline somewhat the project of peacemaking and what are the character components that we need for that project. So I'm still on that first part, you see, of pacifism, as it were, being essential for the conduct of just war. As a project against the conditions of sin, peace then has its own logic. This seems so counter to the world's logic, doesn't it? The logic of peace has what I'm going to suggest in alliteration is number one, it's calm. Number two, it's creative. And three, it's compassionate. All these come especially from Luke's, as well as, of course, to the Beatitudes. And for me, the Gospel of John, especially at the post-resurrection appearances of Jesus there. The logic of peace has those factors of calm, creativity, and compassion. Being at peace means that when one is personally violated, then one does not strike back, That's very much at the condition of personally being Christian. We are to offer, as Jesus says, offer the other cheek when one is slapped in the face, Luke 6:29. That's creative as well as calm activity. I'll come back to that. It does not mean that we passively submit, however, nor does it legitimate violence. It says, then it shows that when we unmask violence and deny its power over us, then we can begin to change the conditions of existence more toward the vocation of the human being that God has called us to be. So when I offer my other cheek to the aggressor, it means I step aside from the logic of domination and humiliation. In fact, I change the terms. It means I don't normalize the violence. I break its chain. I do not respond with anger and the desire for revenge. I am calm when I live my vocation as a peacemaker. Many of us understand the, I think, deeply internal spiritual urge to go that direction, when, as some of you are even right now, looking to be in a time of spiritual retreat. Being calm gives one the space and freedom then to be creative. Have you thought about that? I expect you've experienced it. You've got a deadline, you've got to create something, but the deadline has created deep anxiety, and you're not very creative at it. And after maybe you've achieved something that's, a decent response, you can look back and say, oh, I could have done so much better. Well, when you look back on it, you're at a condition where you're more peaceable about it, aren't you? You can see it with all its warps and woofs, the shape of what you had done. You can understand where it was weak and where it was strong and what could have been more effective and what was effective as well. Creativity comes from the condition of peace. So how can I transform conflict instead of reproducing it? That's what creativity means. How do I love my enemies? How do I do good to those who hate me? Well, as we'll see, by the way, in the criteria or principles for just war thinking, especially in the use post bellum, after war is conducted, just war means that we are mandated to be creative about the new conditions for peace, where everybody would have a voice and opportunity. The third piece that I want to mention about compassion, that the peaceable person and the peaceable society must be characterized by compassion. That's hard today, again, of course, isn't it, if we are not calm, if we are ruled by our viscera, rather than by Christ, the risen Christ within us. That's a hard one, and there's a lot of language that is counter to the Christian logic there. Caring for the neighbor, though, is not a matter of abstraction, is it? We always have to care in particular for what are the particular needs to address. That means we get to know the neighbor. Compassion is to be mindful of another's real personhood, to know that what hurts them hurts me. Compassion recognizes our relationality with all that is. So the more violence I watch on TV, the more I take it in as a matter of course. The more I normalize it, the less sensitive I am to another's personhood, the less I feel another's distress, and so the less human I am. That's a threat, of course, about what is so culturally entertaining these days. But here's a point about that. In my work, as Carl noted at the outset, on moral injury, I saw the factum, and I don't remember the precise numbers now, but I saw the factum that when the authorities took a certain accounting after World War I of who actually aimed their rifle at the enemy of the Allied powers, how many of them actually aimed at the other person across the enemy line? and then pulled the trigger, that was down in the teens, that percentage. Many deliberately raised their rifle apart from the target when pulling the trigger. It shows that their social conditioning was different, doesn't it? Conscience played such a role that they couldn't do it. Behavioral conditioning with the accompaniment today of gaming, online, and PlayStations and so forth, all of that has changed the ratio. So by Vietnam, 97% aimed at the target when they pulled the trigger. Behavioral conditioning was the operant behavioral reconditioning was the changing factor there. Something about normalization, about suppressing compassion. It's not to say that we're in such a condition where, of course, we must train the service member so always to be a sociopath. We're not wanting to do that at all. In fact, we try to rule that out on candidacies, as it were, for enlistment. But it is to say that along with calmness and creativity, that compassion as an element that's missed a bit is something that, with respect to just war principles, is utterly necessary again for the vocation of being Christian, even in a time of war, for following Jesus in a time of war. It is all to say that suffering must never be allowed to be anonymous. Even now, the language of we must maximize lethality in the doing of war is to disable the peaceable heart from doing what it's called to do to conduct just war. That's a deep, not merely ethical, but moral dilemma that we must consider. And as hard as it is to say then, as Jeff and I concluded in the writing of that book, is to say then that the time of going into war is, of course, as an early last resort. I'll come to that in the principles. But it's with the heart and eyes wide open to go into war with a sorrowing heart, and to know that one is doing what one must do and not like it, to put it in the most banal terms. We must avoid unbecoming ourselves in the face of war. So we go into war, the Christian disposition is with eyes wide open, knowing what we do, because, as we'll share in more detail, it would be a greater wrong not to do what we must do. So calm, creativity, compassion. I've quickly gone over those, but that's a renaming of an attitudinal piece in just war thinking that I think that we need to recapture. Now, to check my timing here. Well, the principles of just war themselves. I'm going to presume some familiarity with them, but give you a bit more history. Because they were not just themselves, of course, the product of theory, as if St. Augustine sat down and said, I'm going to think about just war and go for it. It was about 410, I think it was, finally to 417, 418, thereabouts, that he began deliberately thinking about just war principles, especially so when he wrote his great volume of The City of God. But he began addressing them first theologically when he had a confrontation with the heresy of Donatism and is violence justifiable when one deals with schismatics. But even more to the point, it was in 407, I think it was, there was a general Boniface, who was also a count, a Roman count and general, who had converted to Christianity. He had also been recently married. Uh, and there in his position of being a general, obviously in charge of policy and conduct of war making, all this during now the really during the fall of Rome and going against the barbarians, could keep his military post. He also wondered if he should stay married. He had the zeal of the converted. Um, and Augustine basically said in response, in a very pastoral care couched letter, no, do not resign either. You may be wondering about your marital obligations, but you even have to take your martial obligations a little higher. He thought he was punning by changing the location of the I in the Latin. Um, and so it was kind of a quiet joke for him. But he outrightly said, no, you must and should continue your generalhood, your making of war, because it is care for the neighbor on a societal level. If you don't do this, you will not be protecting your country, much more your Roman neighbors, as well as the cause of peace in the world. So he advocated that the general maintain it. And he did that obviously to quell a particular kind of anxiety in the general. There was an early expression of recognizing that Jesus' counsel to love your neighbor as yourself, which was already kind of inter-religiously the golden rule, has its societal expression and needs to be spelled out first. Well, how's Boniface going to do that when warring against the barbarians and protecting Rome against a fall, which would happen anyway? Then about 8 years later, maybe it was 10, he wrote Boniface again, actually criticizing Boniface for avoiding just war and just going all out militarily against barbarians, and said, you got to come back to it, sort of practice what is more exactly a Christian principle. And in between all that, he was writing The City of God and outlining the points of the principles. So he was advocating from the get-go as well for his friend and parishioner, so to speak, Boniface, an inner disposition. That was my first point. And then he came to express what we know as perhaps the most important baseline for just war thinking, and it must be a just cause. This is now on what reasons might we finally decide to go to war? Is the cause just? Jus ad bellum. That is it a defense against an attack? Does it recover stolen property? Does it punish an unrepentant, violent actor? And in the defense against an attack, is it above all a defense of the violated, vulnerable neighbor? Is it an expression of love of neighbor? Then he added some others. Initially, just war principles were 5. And after Aquinas, we had 7. Some people still perseverate over the numbering, but no big deal. So we have just cause. It must be done under legitimate authority. It's got to be organized. It's got to be done under someone whom the people recognize as their sovereign leader, representatively so. So it can only be done under a just ruler, a rightly appointed ruler. There's all kinds of stuff about national sovereignty and political theology that come to the fore there. I obviously can't outline that, but it does get interesting for us Lutherans, at least, who at least initially adopted what was known as two kingdoms doctrine, because two kingdoms doctrine and just war theory were deeply aligned. But legitimate authority broaches the question. It must be with right intention. It must seek peace. Peace is the outcome that is to be sought. It is not for the cause of self-enlargement, either nationally or personally, as is the case with barbarians. And it is the last resort. It is never preferred, never premature. All other options, especially diplomacy, must have been deliberately and diligently explored. There's a second category, general category of those five, after those five principles in the first category, the jus ad bellum, that is preparation for war or rightness to go to war. The second one is right conduct in war. That's jus in bello, Jus in bello, Bello. The first thing there is to draw the distinction between combatants and civilians. And we see, of course, how that feeds so much into rules of engagement in war conduct today. There must be an absolute distinction between the combatants and civilians. And that accrues also, Augustine saw this, to institutions and agencies and properties associated with each. There are military institutions and agencies that Augustine would say would rightly be attacked. There are institutions and agencies and properties that are basically civilian-based. That broaches what we can't follow here, a significant economic question. Is it right then to actually sanction a country and really harm civilians as a way to get at a change of regime? And so here, just war theory, frankly, I'm adding a marginal comment, encounters a kind of a weakness that Augustine did not anticipate. There's proportionality. So there was distinction between combatants and civilians. Proportionality, no excessive force, and use no more force than is necessary to achieve the goal. And then right conduct, follow international laws, including prisoner treatment. That's the second category. I covered ad bellum, in bello, and now post bellum. Just cause for termination. That is, you end the war when the goal is met or when it's no longer valid. Have a just cause. Reestablish peace. Now, that does not mean a return to previous conditions that initiated the war in the first place or catalyzed it. We must actually return to a peaceful condition where the voice of most people, all people, is maximized in equality. And that means that there must be reconstruction in which the winners help and criminal actors are held accountable. And so you see after World War II, Marshall Plan on the first part, war trials on the second part. They were hand in glove as part of jus post bellum. I've covered all of this very quickly in the Augustinian, Aquinas, Christian terms. But note along the way, as is necessarily the case today in an interreligious, pluralistic world, that the language is shifted from distinctly Christian to secular legality. We necessarily speak publicly now more on the side of what is legal and ethical. Although as we Christians, from Christian conviction, must with each other advocate, and from our conviction advocate for what is both Christian and legal. That's a rhetorical exercise that's not easy. But it's also to recognize that there are components of just war thinking in other religions. There is, if we understand Islam correctly, and its meaning of jihad, that Islam is a matter about seeking peace first in the heart. And that then should guide all the rest of one's daily conduct. And then it says jihad on the lesser jihad, as they say, which was, say, call it just war in Islam, is good when the neighbor or one's own religion is deliberately attacked. Can't say that we are so different on that matter ourselves as Christians. that would be a place to talk about how just war fits and find legal language for it for the Muslim world. Buddhism, of course, has no just war theory because it can't, since all violence at the heart of Buddhism is utterly forbidden. And Hinduism very significantly on the question. So from being utterly necessary to absolutely avoidable. But I also want to suggest that secular legality reigns in so much as the sensibility in Western tradition of higher law still holds, which is basically a legal way to understand, again, the golden rule. Just war, insofar as we still hold golden rule high in civic society, just war is a necessary philosophical, if not religious, construct and implication. To conclude, Bonhoeffer was the one in World War II, for Protestant Christians at least, who brought just war thinking back to the fore. And it may be a surprise to note that Bonhoeffer considered himself deeply a pacifist, utterly so, until he could have no other response during the Hitler regime other than to seek a radical means to protect the neighbor. That's the most synthetic and summary way of reasoning Bonhoeffer concerned. Theologically, interestingly, he actually thought we needed to go to war in defense of the Jewish neighbor, because it was the Jewish-Christian relationship, as with Romans 9 through 11, that really guided Dietrich Bonhoeffer to saying that Christians have an obligation to respond now, so to care for the Jewish neighbor. From there, then he went on to talk about the more general aspects of protecting the vulnerable neighbor. When we do so, nevertheless, as Bonhoeffer exemplified, Karl Barth wrote this in other ways, when we would engage in just war, we do so individually bearing our crosses, but we do not impose our crosses on the neighbor. We turn our cheeks, but we protect the cheeks and whole bodies of others. It's to say that if I am attacked as a pacifist in the mode of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who believed that Christ within us guides our actions, he called it the Christus Praesens, the present Christ, raised and ascended into our hearts and very bodies as individuals and as church, that the presence of Christ in me means I must not lash back out when attacked personally, although I can surely hope that one of you will defend me. But when the other is attacked, then it is a necessity to defend the other. In the sinful world, then, on the premise of grace and not gain, we carefully must employ force. We only do war when there's no other way to protect the violated dignity of the God image-bearing neighbor. But I always finally end with the end of John on this matter. Loving our neighbors ourselves, which we know as the second of the two great commandments. Jesus said to his own disciples, love each other as I have loved you. That's yet a higher bar. It requires of us the constant practice of prayer, and precisely it requires critical reflection as to what Christ desires right now, all the time, from each and every one of us. And so I can go back to the insight from Karl in his prayer from St. Francis and to referencing Lao Tzu, that we begin and end with our hearts. How we would extrapolate from that into a societal ethic, that's our common vocation. And it's why we are gathered here already, even if you had not quite exactly those words to put to it. So thank you for bearing with me. I'm eager to hear questions. I've gone longer than I expected, but thanks for bearing with.
Thank you for that great insight. And I know I was taking a lot of notes. I saw that several of you were as well. I did write down your questions, and I think, Dwayne, you've addressed this, but maybe more succinctly because it probably is the preeminent question that we all signed on with today,
Okay.
is how can a war of aggression ever be qualified as a just war? Another way to put that, my words, would be the use of the terminology preemptive strike that
Right.
we began to hear back in the early 2000s, and that seems to be an okay reason now to go to war.
Yep.
Yeah, maybe you'd speak to that more specifically.
Right. Um, in philosophical ethics, the very nuanced distinction, uh, projected and preemptive, the important one there. Uh, of course, preemptive is not in the vocabulary of Augustine. Uh, nor could he use we can project a war or project that there would be a war. Uh, uh, put it another way, anticipated and preemptive are the two words there that are so very important. So I'm just thinking off the cuff, and it seems to me when we talk about, well, we're at what's the naming of it? We're at something level 1, something level 5. What's the term I'm looking for? Uh,
DEF CON.
DEF CON, yes. You know, we're in deep doo-doo at DEF CON 1, right? Or am I backwards? Uh, my point there is
I think
DEF CON was, should we depend on it? If we can depend upon it, all the more important question, by the way, Jennifer, and all of you ask about the war of aggression, all the more important in the realm of AI now. So the ante is way high with AI. Uh, all the more important that DEF CON was a way to try to make a distinction, even if we didn't think about it that way, between likelihood and just anticipation. And the more it was likely, the more necessary to preempt. That's the whole point, right? Um, well, if we're absolutist about it, you have to say on their terms that did not have in mind a DEF CON world. A war of aggression is always absolutely proscribed. It's not allowed. But that's a weakness now for us. We have different questions. So a case could and would have to be made if the conditions for preemptiveness could be objectively legitimized. And that's the question, isn't it? Moral question. When can we legitimize the threat as a genuine threat and therefore preemptively go for it? Uh, and then, of course, if we're going to fire off a nuke aggressively beforehand as a preemptive strike to take most of the nukes out, knowing that a number of nukes are coming back, wow. Um, I guess at that point, I'm having to say, as a Christian in protection of Christians, I think we can't fire. But as a Christian in protection of a whole world, then maybe somebody makes the argument we must fire. I don't have an answer there, but as whoever wants to dare ask where the level of threat can objectively require preemptivity, there we go. And then I think about the conditions for as our constitutional ordering in the United States. What would that be? Because we require that the commander in chief come to Congress to declare war. Of course, we know all the questions are about that even as we speak now. You mentioned that Senate may be in a vote. As we require that, we're in an age where those are obsolete requirements when the uh, digitized decision-making processes are at light speed?
Thank you.
That's a
I'm gonna
scary question, scary answer, but um,
a
how
a lot to chew on.
we cannot, however, answer it without insisting upon above all other things on peaceableness in our hearts. If it's
Um,
just a matter of theory, we're lost.
well, and I would say there's an aggressive intention at work
Well,
here,
of
but
course.
I don't want to go down that rabbit hole.
Yeah,
I want
yeah.
to honor the questions that were put in our chat. So this next question is a little more personal, going back to the things that you outlined at the beginning about calmness and creativity and compassion. And the question harkens back to World War II. How is it that those who are victims of such heinous violence, the Holocaust victims, how is it that they are able to triumph, might not be the right word, but to rise above in a productive way those SS officers who are routinely and methodically killing them? How does the creativity, the compassion for us as individuals in that moment,
Yes,
how does that work?
that's a great question. And uh, I'm reminded of the work of Ernst Becker, and another one whose name is escaping me at the moment, a great post-World War II writer, Erich Fromm, um, who spoke of experiencing that vilification firsthand, right? And yet being able to rise above it, an attitude of calm, even though non-Christian, we say found a way stoically to be at peace with oneself. Um, to which credit, by the way, the military is very, at least it has been. I'm worried that it's being suppressed of late. The military educational institutions have really uplifted Stoicism as kind of, I'll call it the non-denominational philosophy for inculcating what I've been arguing for as peaceableness of heart. The Admiral Stockdale Chair at the Naval War College, for example, is dedicated to that, to lift up Stoic principles above other things and to try to teach as best as possible um, uh, our service members how to practice that. So creativity and compassion, again, first come from the calmness of heart. What avenues are there to seek that out? Erich Fromm wrote of that, as I said, and many others. That's the personal side. We all here know of avenues to go there. Um, uh, and the Christian tradition is wonderfully rich to overflowing with various traditions that teach peaceableness of heart, including being in solitary retreat. So there are many ways we can teach, of course, a kind of AA set of principles, directly along the line of the, Jesuitical self-measuring.
We're coming up to the top of the hour. I'm wondering if thank you, Dr. Larson, that you have given me lots to think about. I'm wondering if I might be able to, you talked about AA, if I might be able to offer a version, the long version of the Serenity Prayer,
Oh,
concluding our time together. Would that be okay? So let us pray. God, grant us the serenity to accept the things we cannot change, courage to change the things we can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, accepting hardship as a pathway to peace. Taking as Jesus did this sinful world as it is, not as I would have it. Trusting that you will make all things right if we surrender to your will so that we may be reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy with him forever in the next. Amen.
Thank you,
Carl,
everybody.
let me follow Carl's beautiful benediction by saying Carl has something else to tell us that he wants to invite us into.
I am so grateful for this opportunity to be in conversation, even though it wasn't a lot of conversation. I am just, yeah. Dr. Larson gave us lots of stuff, and I have some friends, colleagues that enjoy talking about these issues, and would like to continue the conversation. So there's opportunity there, and we'll see how that goes. June 2nd at 7 p.m., I will host a video Zoom meeting. If you're interested in joining us for continued conversation around peace, how we might find calm, creative, compassionate ambition for peace together, please send me your email, and I will send you an invitation.
Thank you, Carl. And apologies to those of you whose questions we were not able to address. I think that Dwayne and Carl and I can hang around for another few minutes, but we do want to honor everybody's time. It's the top of the hour. If you feel like you need to log off and go back to doing whatever the world is calling you to do, please feel free to do that. The last question that we had, Dwayne, really is encapsulated by a lot of what we just talked about, and that was the question of racism as a means of reduced compassion by reducing the other. And I wonder if we could broaden that maybe a little bit to say that's going on in almost every conversation that I overhear. That we're not actually talking to each other anymore in any sense of calmness or compassion. We're just trying to beat up each other. We're just trying to win over the argument on one another. And then maybe, just to harken back to what you ended with a moment ago, we have to practice this calmness. This isn't something that we just wake up and say, okay, well, today I'm going to be a calm person. And I'm not sure that a lot of folks are engaged in the Christian practices in ways that form them to be people who can lean first into calmness and creativity and compassion. So anyway, take that away.
That's a great insight. Thank you, Jennifer. First, let's recall that to be calm does not negate harboring righteous anger. I'm reminded way back into my seminary clinical pastoral education days. We had to be sure that we were calm before we walked cold call into the patient room, right? And what did that mean? It meant to develop the ability to measure and see our emotions. What are the drivers going on that produce our anxieties in the moment? And just being able to step back and look at them and name them is a manner of being calm. Certainly praying is a superb Christian tradition practice that helps us in doing that. But it means that the prayer there, actually itself takes some time too, to allow Spirit to bring to our mind just what it is that is making us so anxious. Anger can still drive a calm heart, but when the calm heart controls the anger and is informed by it, that is, takes some data by it, then we can be creative about our responses. And I'm not saying this as someone who knows as some kind of expert on how this is to be done. By far not so. But I know that's my task each and every time. I used to have red hair. I don't know what color this is now. But as a redheaded kid, I knew that the redheads, my own name was Fireball by my friends, my nickname, because I could be emotional and so forth. And redheads had that temperament. But I came to learn that I had to claim the name, and in claiming it, overcome it and norm it and control it and bring it to my advantage in some tactically smart way, perhaps. Uh, so the emotions and calmness are not oppositions. So the calmness organizes it all. And with that data, then we go forward. I think that's part of the Ignatian exercises in the Jesuit tradition, to be able to name that and then go, okay, now what's next? Certainly is partly there in the wisdom of the AA protocols as a good example too. When it comes to race, though, what is the unnamed issue going on there? It's about the waging of just war. I could go to the Islamic higher jihad here, is a war against the heart, kind of a violent name for what I'm trying to say about a peaceable heart, but it's to say the heart itself must be calm, and it must attend to the principles of mutual care and equality. What's really at work in racism that politically is so tragically guiding our conversation is the desire for supremacy. That's why whiteness and nationalism, as the supposed predicates for Christianity today, must not be suppressed or separated. We need to recognize that's what's going on. And then the driver there is superiority, self-enlargement, which means we don't even know what it means in our claimed Christian heart to be justified before God and each other. We have not claimed the gift, the grace, and the graciousness of being Christian as the utter ground of peace already given us. And present, were we mindful of Jesus with us, in us, and for us. So there, the terms of sin, which is the logic of the world, I would do this in kind of a Barton or William Stringfellow way, if you remember his name. I would say there they are taking the Christian terminology and practices captive in the name of sin and pretending that that's holy. So you could get my redheaded temperament really going on that question, but name all the more there. What's up? Racism is the political name for our unacceptance, inability to accept justification as a grace from God. That's a pithy way of going, and I'll suggest pithy as something to chew on for a while.
Carl, would you like to add anything at this point?
I thank you for that opportunity, but I would love to hear more about conscience from Dwayne, but I think we've already got enough. We've already got enough to contemplate. So
let me though. We do. You've been so helpful for me. I've got thousands of things I want to follow up on. But let me do say about conscience that Martin Luther believed in conscience. So did Augustine. So I'm speaking from my knowledge of my own tradition. I can't speak about my ecumenical partners there, although Catholics certainly believe in conscience too. Conscience is the term for what initially we called the natural law. It wasn't as if there's certain ways in nature that have to go the way they go. Their conscience was the name of what we first of all regarded naturally as fair, as how to act fairly. So Luther believed, and he wrote this in his lectures on Genesis, that the natural law of conscience is written into the secular world, on which basis, as well as the image of God stuff, to honor and respect and love the secular world, and to then promote and do lawfulness for that point, for that sake of the secular world. We don't necessarily societally and philosophically believe much in conscience anymore for a whole lot of reasons, which I'd love to outline, but that's a whole nother several hours.
But you're exactly right. And I think that gets to the root of a lot of what's going on, and who supports a war and doesn't support a war really
Yeah,
boils down into who is defining what it is right now to be a Christian,
yeah.
and how it is we behave as Christians. And I could go on for another hour if we wanted to have that conversation, but we can't today. And the council has got some things online dealing with that sort of thing, and we're working on some resources for the summer to talk about rooting ourselves in a Christianity that does the things that Dwayne has talked about. First, we're rooted in love. That's where it all has to start. And I love your reminder, Dwayne, your Lutheran reminder, which all of us as Christians adopt, but the Lutherans put it so wonderfully that reconciliation really has three pieces. And until we know that we are reconciled with God and with one another and with ourselves, we really can't start doing any of this work. So I'm deeply appreciative to you for bringing us these insights, reminding us of these insights, if some of us on the screen maybe studied this years ago, and for taking some time out of your very busy schedule to be with us today, and to give us things to think about when we call our senators this afternoon, which now we must all go and do as they prepare to vote in the Senate. So
Thank you so
thank you,
much.
Dwayne, thank you, Carl. Thanks to all
Thank
of
you.
you who are here with us today. We really appreciate your attention to this important
Okay.
matter.
Christ peace to you all. Okay.